Hey, welcome to BIA Live. I am your host, Kevin Noon. It is Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. in the East, 7:30 a.m. in the West. I'm glad I'm not in the West because that would be really early, but this show was regularly scheduled to go down on Thursday, and I kept trying to kick the can down the road a little bit with all of the expansion news, everything going on, hoping to be able to get a little further down the line, get a little further with what's going on, to have a little bit more clarity. But as things are going quicker and quicker, I just realized that I wasn't going to be able to push this show down. So, it may be a little bit more of me talking and a couple fewer questions, because I didn't do a great job of promoting the show. But once again, it's just an opportunity for me to get some of these thoughts out there. Replay value is fantastic, so be sure to let us know in the comments down below your thoughts on all of this. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, all of that good stuff. Love having the questions here. Love having you as part of the show. So, I want to kind of talk about Big Ten Media Days. We'll do that in a few minutes. A little bit about the Olympics as well. Some news going on with Olympic gymnastics, Simone Biles, what's happening there. I have some very real thoughts about that. It's my show, so I can kind of talk about that. But once again, your comments help dictate the show as well with what it is that we're going to talk about, because ultimately I could just talk to the cat and the dog here if I just wanted to talk, and I want to have the conversation with you. But let's first get to conference realignment, conference expansion. And obviously, it was a situation. Hey, Ryan, how are you doing? Glad to have you here on the show. It comes down to a point of where Texas and Oklahoma are obviously acting in their best interest, as they should. As they should. You have your own school to run, you have your own program to worry about. It's not necessarily a situation of where you need to sit there and focus on what's best for the Big 12. Let's not forget the Big 12 does not have the history of all of these other conferences. The Big 12 is just a mashup of the old Southwest Conference and the old Big 8 of the members that are still left there. And it's not like we haven't seen departures from the Big 12. Obviously, Nebraska moved over from the Big 12 to the Big 10. And while Nebraska's success has not been tremendous at any stretch, they certainly are more financially solvent for doing so. The broadcast rights in the Big 10 are better. There's just some better opportunities there. I've always kind of felt that the Big 12 has been a conference that's been out on an island. And I think one of the biggest complaints about the Big 12 was that it was the Texas League. And that doesn't mean all of the schools that are in the state of Texas. That doesn't mean it was the Texas and Texas Tech and before A&M left to go to the SEC A&M and Baylor League. It was the University of Texas League. And that's why you saw the Aggies leave. And that's why you saw Nebraska leave. Because in a lot of regards, it was unevenly yoked. It was unevenly weighted, where it seems like whatever they wanted in Austin, that Austin seemed to get to a certain extent. Now, that didn't necessarily mean a lot more money, even though the Longhorns did create their own network. And I'm still really looking for more than 2 or 3 people who have ever seen it, because it never got any clearance out there nationally. But, you have Texas and Oklahoma now saying, well, we're going to go to the SEC. And, they've already gone and left the Big 12 in theory. They've gone and said, we're not going to renew our rights. It's the first step for leaving. And according to national reports today, the two schools are supposed to be going and petitioning the SEC for admittance. Now, theoretically, they shouldn't be able to participate in the league until I think it's 2025. And Ryan, I'll get to your question here in half a second. And they're saying the right things. We're not going to go until 2025. We're going to fulfill our contractual obligations. Well, when you hear contractual obligations and things of that nature, that just means one thing. We're just preparing our case. And with that being said, I don't see any way that either of those schools, if they do in fact go to the SEC, and the SEC would be stupid not to take them, if they go to the SEC, that they don't, that they're not playing by 22, maybe 23 at the latest, probably 22. I mean, how long of a divorce? I mean, how long of an ugly divorce can you have at this point? If Texas people are all up in arms about horns down or whatever, can you imagine the stuff they're going to get from the remaining members who are going to see their conference share greatly diminished? This is going to be the least of their concerns. So, it's going to be interesting. Ryan's asking me if the Big Ten should look over this AAU stuff in order to strengthen the conference. We're going to talk about the Big Ten in particular. We're going to talk about Ohio State in particular here in a second. I'm just setting the scene for anybody who's been on a long ocean voyage, hasn't been paying attention, really enthralled with the Olympics, maybe the casual person who just stumbled upon this by accident. So setting the scene a little bit, and then we'll get into that. Because obviously, this is an Ohio State show. This Big Ten show. That's what people want to talk about. So we're going to focus on that, but just want to get things set up. So you've got it where these two teams will be joining the SEC, probably competing in 2022, 2023. And then you've got 8 teams left in the Big 12. And, as we talk about what's next for those 8 teams? Because as much of a concern as people are going to say, well, what does this mean for Ohio State? What does this mean for the Big Ten? What does this mean for the Pac-12? And the list goes on and on and on and on. What does this mean for these 8 teams? I mean, you already had to basically make some special rules to have a conference championship game with fewer than 12 at 10. Well, now they're going to be looking at 8 in a to-be-determined year. So they're going to have to look to expand. But it's not like anybody from the group of 5 is necessarily moving the needle. I mean, you certainly do have your Cincinnatis and your UCFs and your programs like that have moved the needle recently. I think that Cincinnati has done a tremendous job of moving from coach to coach to coach to coach. I mean, there've been a couple that haven't necessarily worked out. Tommy Tuberville was not necessarily moving the needle the way that some other guys are, and certainly Luke Fickell now at this point is. But, Luke's not going to be there forever. Again, he might. I mean, he's such a homebody. He doesn't like to move around that much. But I think if Notre Dame ever comes open, he's gone. He's gone to go to Notre Dame. That just seems like a perfect fit. But I don't think Brian Kelly's in a hurry to move. So what happens there? And then, of course, people want to talk about, what does this mean for Kansas? What does this mean for Iowa State? Even Oklahoma State. These schools getting mentioned as potential Big Ten add-ins. And let me jump here to our board. All right, and we'll kind of jump. We'll go in order. So I'm going to jump out of order a little bit here. But let me start and say that the Big Ten is not in a position to where it has to, and I'm just realizing I'm running 2 microphones here. There we go. Where it's going to have to make a move to survive. It might have to make a move to stay competitive as we sit here and move toward a potential 12-team playoff here at some point, whatever that may look like, whatever that may be. I mean, you do want to keep up with the Joneses, but did the Big Ten necessarily go out and make the best football move in the world when it added Maryland and Rutgers? I say no. But I also tell people that expansion is so much more than just football. It's more than athletics. It's about, it's even more than what we heard from Jim Delaney about it being about television households. I mean, remember, anybody who joins the Big Ten joins the BTAA. And I think that's like the Big Ten Academic Alliance, which used to be the CIC, and that was like the Council of Institutional Cooperation. There's a ton... there's a ton of money involved there. I mean, I think that we're talking about close to $10 billion in terms of grant and research money, and it's not necessarily a case of where it just means that suddenly you have this financial windfall, but it puts you in a situation to where the research side of your university is in a much better financial position, whether or not it's just in terms of group buying power to putting you in line for certain, research grants and things. But remember, Rutgers opened up New York City, allegedly. Maryland opened up DC. Both of those are very important in terms of the BTAA. So you just can't go in and throw in a tier 2 or tier 3 academic school just because you think that it moves the needle. Now, let me jump back to something Ryan had said earlier. The Big Ten seems to be hell bent on schools being part of this AAU, this American Association of Universities, not the off-season basketball league, the AAU, and 13 of the 14 football playing schools in the Big Ten are members of the AAU. All 14 were upon admittance to the Big Ten. Nebraska had it, lost it, working toward it. I don't know all the finer points. I think some of it has to do with the medical school is not part of UNL, with University of Nebraska Lincoln. It's part of Omaha. I think there was something there in terms of on the agricultural side, but Nebraska's taking steps to get there. A report came out saying that the Big Ten is not going to be looking at schools that are not part of the AAU. Texas is part of the AAU. Oklahoma is not. That doesn't mean that an Oklahoma degree is not good. That doesn't mean that people that graduate from University of Oklahoma have some sort of subpar deficient degree out of a diploma mill or anything like that. It just means they don't have this accreditation. But you do have to wonder if the same leadership group in the Big Ten that saw fit to cancel a season prematurely, bungle most of that situation, would bungle possible realignment and expansion. I think that's one place, and this is not a Kevin Warren thumbs up, thumbs down statement. And I know that I could probably get mad clicks and mad likes and everything else out there if I went on some diatribe about Kevin Warren this and Kevin Warren that. I'm not going to do that. At least not at this point. But I think this is a place where you really miss somebody like Jim Delaney, who was a longtime commissioner, longtime in collegiate athletics, versus Kevin Warren, who came over from the Minnesota Vikings, who came over from the pro side of things, who doesn't necessarily have all of the understanding, all of the depth of knowledge, all of that when it comes to collegiate athletics. And I think there should be some concern there in terms of if your end goal is Big Ten expansion, you want the Big Ten to expand, maybe his lack of depth in that could be a downside. Now, with that being said, we learned at Big Ten Media Days, Barry Alvarez has been elevated to some sort of special assistant role, football. I don't know if that necessarily means he's going to be in there with the academic types talking about what it takes to gain Big Ten admission or things along those lines. That I'm not sure about. I don't think any of us know that answer. So there is a football mind in the room, but is he at the table? I don't know. But let's kind of go through these as I wrote them up beforehand. And again, thanks for joining us. This was supposed to be a Thursday show. I moved it to Tuesday. Just too much happening right now. I felt like I was definitely missing an opportunity by not moving forward with this right now. Seeing a couple likes come in. Thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like. Got the super chat option if you like what we're doing. That gives us an opportunity to do much more here with the show. Trying out a new platform here with Ecamm Live, liking it so far, probably will sign up, probably will continue doing shows moving forward on Ecamm Live. But your subscriptions, your likes, all of that certainly help the channel. Super chat, not a bad thing either. But back to this point, what does the Big Ten do? Does it stand pat? The Big Ten's come out and said, we're not going to expand for the sake of expansion. We hear that kind of stuff all the time. Well, I'm not going to do this just because you told me to do this. a lot of us who are married have either said that to our spouse or had our spouse say that to us. So we know that statement all too well. I'm not doing it just because you're telling me to do it. I'm not going to expand just because talk radio and Kevin Noon on BIA Live is telling us to go live or to expand. We're not going to do it just for that. I mean, it has to make sense. You have to make sure if you're going to be paying out a 15th team, a 16th team, a 20th team, however big you go, you got to make sure that you're not losing money in the deal. And the Big Ten's grant of rights is coming up here. Their TV deals are coming up. There's going to be the opportunity to make a lot more money. A shrewd thing that Jim Delaney did on his way out is he made sure that the Big Ten's deal was the first one up to be renegotiated. And that's a good thing because you get to set the market to a certain extent. Plus, two, you're insulating yourself. I mean, we don't know where streaming is going. We don't know where a lot of other things are going. We have so many people cutting the cable and things of that nature. So we don't know necessarily if the salad days of all of this television money is going to be there long term. While it might be nice to get locked in on a big deal, a long deal, and have a set amount to where okay, teams are going to be getting a distribution of X amount per year in for the next 15 years. But I also think that by doing this, you have the opportunity to raise that number again. You don't get stagnant on it. It's it could be like anything else in sports. You sit there and you see the pitcher who signed 6 years ago, compared to what the numbers are right now. I mean, again, the pitchers that signed 6 years ago is doing quite well for himself. But the money and the people who are coming up now, who are going into free agency after this season, astronomical. I mean, astronomical. Go back 10 years, go back 15 years. And if you're dealing with, if you're doing a 15-year grant of rights, I mean, you look at the ACC, which goes out to 34, 35, something like that. I mean, we're still, 13 years away on that? I mean, there's a long time there. And when everybody else has their rights come up before then, they could certainly be passed. So the point being, don't put a team in there just to put a team in there. A team has to bring at least $70 million worth of value per year, in my opinion, for this to be worth anything. And this is just in terms of broadcast rights. This is not in terms of what does it mean for jersey sales. What does this mean for academia? This has to be just in terms of what it is that Kevin Warren and the Big Ten lawyers and everybody else who goes to TV and says, okay, we're ready to negotiate our new rights. It has to be worth about 70 mil per team, or you're losing money. You could sit there and bake the same pie, and instead of cutting it into 6 slices, you have to cut it into 8 slices. Everybody's getting less pie. So you need to make sure that you're making a bigger pie. And by doing a bigger pie, that has to be teams that move the needle more. So I don't know if standing pat is the worst idea in terms of just the small financials, but it's a perception nightmare. It is a perception nightmare. The Big Ten, the conference that kind of bungled COVID in terms of how it handled its season, is now not going to get involved in the realignment expansion dance party. I don't know if that's a move that they can make. I'm just not convinced of that. So let's jump to point 2, Notre Dame. And what about the ACC? Well, these kind of fly together. And you keep hearing me throw out 2034, 2035. That's how long the grant of rights goes for the ACC. So in theory, that makes the ACC nearly untouchable for poaching. It doesn't mean it can't happen. And the ACC kind of changed its model. It used to be that you could buy your way out, and that's what Maryland did. And Maryland did that with money that it was fronted from the Big Ten as a deduction that's coming off of its future earnings in terms of broadcast rights. Maryland needed to get into a new situation in the worst way and was willing to take that poison pill to get out. Well, now that's not a case in the ACC. Everybody together is pretty much locked in. You can't do anything. And you'll say to me, Kevin, but Notre Dame, not really part of the ACC. That was a 1-year deal. Well, remember, Notre Dame athletics outside of football still participates largely in the ACC. Hockey being different, they're in the Big Ten. ACC doesn't have hockey as a conference. So what is the concession there? Notre Dame cannot join a conference not named the ACC through this grant of rights. So I don't know necessarily how you pull Notre Dame separately without finding a way to blow up the ACC. Now, what if the Big Ten says, all right, we're going to take 8 teams from the ACC? Now that's kind of crazy. I don't know if there are 8 teams, even if you throw Notre Dame in as an ACC team. I don't know if there are 8 teams there that I would want if I'm Kevin Warren or the Big Ten. But what happens if you sit there and you take it to the point of where the ACC has less than 50% of its membership? Is there a way that you could sit there and quote unquote like break the quorum? Is there a way that you could sit there and say, hey, we don't, you don't, how are you going to enforce this? Good luck. You don't have membership to be able to come in and try and collect this money. See you in court. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be the case, because ultimately, all right, what happens if you sit there and say, we want Notre Dame, Clemson, UNC, UVA, I don't know, Boston College. I mean, we're at 5 right there. Florida State. I mean, and I don't even know AAU membership on all these programs. That's 6. I mean, we're getting to the point of where you're having to start digging. I mean, Duke. Duke certainly fits the academic side. Certainly fits athletics, not named football side. I mean, there's some things there, but I still think you're kind of hard pressed to do that. Plus, we don't know if that works. I mean, the 6 teams or however many teams are left may still have an ironclad case and be like, well, we're getting paid off of this, because there's just, you're having to take this contract to court and they're going to try and enforce it, and you got to find a way to break it. So I don't know. It's a difficult situation there. We could look at the Big 12 pieces. Everybody, right, not everybody, but a lot of the national types say, well, Kansas is a slam dunk. Kansas has no commitment to the sport of football, has a basketball program that's under heavy investigation, and doesn't bring anything in terms of households or anything else in television. So I don't know what it is that Kansas necessarily brings that people want to see. We all seem to be measuring expansion, realignment under the football metric. Kansas can't get out of its own way. People sit there and say that, Rutgers is this and Rutgers is that, and I think Greg Schiano's turning it around. I mean, but, Rutgers had been kind of the butt of the joke. Kansas, I mean, and I know, and I'm looking it up as we're talking. I know that Kansas and Rutgers have played each other a couple of times, and I think that pre-Schiano, that Kansas's will to win was a little greater than Rutgers's will to win. But with that being said, Winsipedia is not coming up for me quickly right now. It's just not a great fit. It's just not a great fit. It's not going to, you're not going to get $70 million for broadcast rights there. You're just not. I mean, certainly it would add to the basketball prestige, but you're also dealing with a program right there that seems to be in the eyes of the FBI. I mean, it seems to be in the eyes of a situation. And yeah, 2018 Kansas beat Rutgers 55-14 in Lawrence. So that's not just a beating. That's a beat down. But what happens if they ever get to the point of where they the FBI and the NC2A get to the point of that they're able to nail Kansas for whatever these allegations are? Then you're dealing with a program, you're dealing with the best selling point of Kansas falling off the table. And I don't think that, I mean, you could punish Kansas for X amount of time or whatever. Kansas, it'll bounce back at some point, but you're certainly not getting your $70 million there. Yakov, thanks for joining the show. Would adding Baylor and TCU significantly help the Big in Texas Southwest? On the field, they may be better than at least half the Big Ten. Well, You're also dealing with, you're dealing with a couple of smaller schools that, Baylor certainly has had itself a run here, off and on, but Baylor is, coming off of its scandals. TCU is an even smaller school that, seems to have some success, but it certainly would not help schools like Ohio State, who don't need help recruiting in Texas and the Southwest. I mean, does it help maybe some of the have-nots in the Big Ten? Potentially. I mean, you could be playing, if you added both of those schools, I mean, you potentially could be playing one or the other yearly, depending on how divisions work out or however you handle that. But I don't know if it necessarily I don't know if the upside of that is worth all of the downside. And again, you're just dealing with a situation where Baylor has just been constantly in trouble with, and I just don't want to get into all of the stuff because, with sexual assault allegations, you're still not that far removed from the foot or the basketball situation of where one player was accused of murdering another player. There's just a lot of things going on there that would have me very hinky about the addition of Baylor, and TCU really even adds less in terms of what the grand reach of it is. I just don't know. But I know that people also talk about Iowa State, and they see Matt Campbell at Iowa State, and they see a program that seems to be on the rise, and Iowa State seems to be this and seems to be that. But there's no way that Iowa's going to go for it, and that doesn't mean that one team could just sit there and completely shut it down. But the addition of Ames, Iowa, that doesn't add anything in terms of household. That doesn't add anything in terms of prestige. I wouldn't be opposed to Iowa State if the Big Ten went to add 6 teams and Iowa State was the 6th team. I still think I would have an issue with it, but I don't have an issue with it. But it's certainly not a headliner. It's not a co-headliner either. It's really not even a supporting act. It's that opening act that comes in when for maybe like the sound check. I mean, it's just not necessarily a good fit. All right, TCU. I mean TCU is more in the Fort Worth, but yeah, it is the Dallas Metroplex. It's the DFW Metroplex, and they do have a stadium, but again, I don't know if is the addition of TCU, and if you're late to the show, Yakov, sorry. I mean, as I'd said, will they bring in $70 million annually worth toward the television contract? I'm going to say no. Most people in Dallas are either Texas or Oklahoma or an A&M fans. I mean, it's kind of the way Chicago is. I mean, Chicago has like Northwestern up there, on the North Coast in Evanston, and you do have some Northwestern fans, but it's not a place where it's the addition of Dallas is not you're not or the addition of TCU is not going to give you Dallas. The addition of TCU is not going to give you Fort Worth. It's a city or cities that become a hub for people all over, and you're just going to have a widespread reach. I mean, I would argue that there might be as many Arkansas fans out in Fort Worth as there are TCU fans. I'm not convinced that you're going to gain a bunch. And if TCU were just killing it in terms of recruiting in DFW and just pulling all these kids and going head to head with Texas and OU and A&M and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then I might feel differently. But I just think it's a little bit more of a niche situation. And because of that, it just kind of is what it is. I mean, and that doesn't mean that they don't have a strong, passionate fan base. It just happens to be a small one. So I just don't know if there's enough there. And then I want to bring up one more school, and that's Oklahoma State. I've seen, every time we turn around, we see so-and-so is scheduled to have a call with the Big Ten, only to be proven that hasn't necessarily, happened. Oklahoma State makes even less sense to me just because Oklahoma State always felt like it was the anchor keeping Oklahoma from going potentially to the Big Ten, other than the fact that Oklahoma didn't have AAU accreditation. So I don't necessarily know what Oklahoma State brings to the table. Rest in peace, Boone Pickens. I mean, he could have written some big checks and whatnot, and that certainly might have made them look better. But even when he was still alive, he wasn't able necessarily to better Oklahoma State's lot in terms of, be it the Big 12 or whatever else. So without T Boone Pickens, I really don't know what they're going to get. So I don't see anything in the Big 12 that necessarily is a conversation starter, middler, or finisher. There's just nothing really there. And I think that it's going to be a case of where you may see the Pac-12, especially, and we're going to talk about the Pac-12 here in a second. If they get rated, I think you're going to see a situation of where some of these former Big 12, and it's a little early for me to be eulogizing the Big 12. I get it. Eulogizing, a conference that is still in play, still at 10 teams at this point. I think you're going to see bits and pieces have to go there. I think you could see some unfortunate teams maybe even fall down to the AAC. But then it also brings up the question, if we lose a Power 5 conference, does the AAC move up to become a fifth Power 5 team or Power 5 conference? Do we just have a Power 4? I mean, I don't know there. Ben jumps in, Notre Dame or the AAU Pac-12 schools, and that's exactly where I was going to go. And I think a lot of us have heard some things, and I know an insider over on another one of the sites who I used to work with, he certainly mentioned the Pac-12 schools, and he's not the only one. But I know that I had a lot of people very excited and said, "Hey, haven't you hear what he had said?" And it does make some sense. There are a lot of parts of it that are not impossible, but there's some logistical issues in terms of how you're going to make things work there. But it certainly checks off a lot of boxes in terms of, do you have the AAU membership? Yes. Do you have the draw? Yes. I mean, granted, one of the biggest issues that the Pac-12 has is that anybody east of the Rockies probably is not watching, and that's because a lot of games are on late, and it hasn't necessarily been super exciting, or at least exciting enough to draw people in, so people aren't necessarily going out to consume those games. I mean, even the games that would be at 5 Pacific, because people are watching the national games that generally have the SEC or the Big 10 or the Big 12 at that point, so you're not getting there. But this is where your television partners mean so much more. If you look at the SEC, and ABC, ESPN is all in there. They've pushed their chips. Let me get that so it's on camera. They pushed their chips all in. So a lot of money is going to be tied up there. Could we see it to where Fox really becomes the sole rights holder to the Big Ten? Could we see that situation? If that happens, they're already a rights holder to the Pac-12. If they could get that, I mean, and they could set it up to where they have programming throughout the day, they have these marquee programs out west, it might make some sense financially for them to be able to pony up a little bit more as you're trying to hit that $70 million number. And again, that's just a number that I've heard people use. I mean, it's not necessarily, I haven't done the due diligence on what the number actually should be, but it sounds about right to me. Let me jump in here with Yakov, and then I'll get back to Ben's question. So I'm just brainstorming how to move the needle without having to go to the West Coast, the time difference, and not sure. Yeah, I get it. It's difficult, Yakov, and I'm thinking about how, is this a football only move? Is this how do you necessarily do this? Let's rewind several years ago to this scheduling agreement that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 made. Well, we never got to that point. We're going to have it to where there's going to be this agreement to where we're always going to have one of your non-conference games is going to be between the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and it's all going to be great. And then Ohio State goes and cancels series against Tennessee and Georgia, only to have this agreement never really get completed and fall apart. And then you have both these conferences moving to 9 league games and being kind of unequal with everybody else. So, there certainly is a willingness to work between these two leagues. But I think about, what does this mean for even like basketball? Stay in the revenue side, but a sport that you play sometimes 3 times a week. You might almost have to for teams coming out east and teams going out west, you might have to do a situation of where you utilize more distance learning. And if you're going to sit there and do like an SC UCLA swing or something like that, like on like a Saturday Tuesday, you might have to sit there and do Zoom learning and just kind of stay out, because are you really going to go out play a game against SC on Saturday, even if it's a Saturday day game? Get home pretty late on Saturday night. You're back on Sunday, but jet lagged. You have your NC2A off day or whatever. Practice on Monday. Fly out on Monday. Fly out maybe Tuesday morning. I wouldn't want to fly out the day of a game, so maybe you have to fly out on Monday to go and play on Tuesday, and then even if you fly back overnight, you're back and pretty much wasted on Wednesday. So I don't know how you would do this on sports where you play more than once a week. It might be difficult, but it certainly seems to be. Is it a difference maker? Does it make a splash? Yes. Is the Pac-12 product right now fantastic? No. Talk to me here second week of the season when Oregon comes into Columbus to take on Ohio State. I'll be talking it up. I'll be like, oh yeah, it's fantastic. Because that's going to be the marquee game of the offseason in the conference. Between that and, I mean, obviously you have Michigan playing Washington, and then you have the one other crossover game where Penn State plays Auburn. But, this Ohio State-Oregon game is going to be, the one that we're all going to be talking about. But, does the addition of the, I don't know if you go these 6 teams, you're going to be at 20. Is 20 the right number? Do you sit there and have a situation to where you kind of pot it out and you really just make sure that, I mean, the good news is, at least in football, if you have those 6 teams and you take maybe your 4 westernmost teams, Nebraska, I don't have the map in front of me, Iowa, whatever, and you have them kind of cross over there a little bit more. Is that work? And then you have like 1 or 2 games to where you come across. I mean, again, we're not dealing with a situation. I mean, Oregon's coming out to play Ohio State. You have Ohio State, Tulsa, but Tulsa to Columbus is not nearly as bad as Eugene to Columbus, or LA to Columbus, or San Francisco to Columbus. I mean, so there's a lot to process there, but I think that if anything is going to work, it would probably be the Pac-12. But let me come back full screen, because let's talk about Ohio State in particular. Hello, there we are. What about Ohio State? What if Ohio State decided to blaze its own path? What if Ohio State said, well, we've seen breakdowns in the Big Ten, and maybe we go and look. Now, I don't want to start anything. Oh my God, Noon said that Ohio State's definitely leaving. And I know that there's a guy about a boat on social media who seems to believe, or maybe he doesn't believe it, maybe he's just hunting for clicks, that Ohio State is off to the SEC or whatever. And wouldn't that be something? I mean, you're dealing with a situation to where the Big Ten's grant of rights is coming up in a couple years. Ohio State, historically, Ohio State's not a founding member of the Big Ten, but it's been in there forever and a day. I don't think Ohio State, in terms of being, just what it is, wants to give up on the BTAA, wants to give up on some of these, benefits that are in place. Would moving to the SEC, a move to the SEC absolutely would kill it in terms of the football product, but are you cutting off your nose to spite your face to do that? And that's not to say the SEC isn't a fine conference, but the SEC is not the Big Ten. It's just not. And I mean, I can hear the hate coming in from my Southern friends my wife went to an SEC school. So, I catch a lot of grief even at home. So you look at this, there's still going to be Ohio State's still going to be Ohio State. You could put Ohio State Independent. You could put them in, you could put them in the Sun Belt, and Ohio State still going to be Ohio State. But you do lose out on some benefits by leaving. But it does bring up the question about what happens if we just sit there and go to the super conferences. And I don't know if we want to see 24 team super conferences. I don't know if that's the right answer. As Jim Delaney said toward the end of his tenure, the purpose of conference play is to play your conference mates more. You want to play more games against them. That was when the Big Ten moved from 8 to 9, and I agree. But then again, really, what's the difference when you sit there and you look at if Ohio State is going to really be an annual member in the college football playoff field, be it 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 256, whatever, you're just playing against a pod, which happens to be the Big Ten, to get to the playoff to go play these other teams. So if maybe you take out the middleman a little bit and you play them a little bit earlier because you're in there and you do create still like a northern pod, which, I don't necessarily know what that would look like. I was trying to build a graphic of that before the show, and I just it's just way too controversial, and I kind of walked away from it. And again, I moved the show up, so I didn't have a day or two to prep for it. A lot going on. But, is that the worst scenario? I mean, I think that if you sit there and you talk to Dr. Christina Johnson, it probably is. I mean, she's got a full university to run, a school that's, a leader in all of these fields of study and research and whatnot. I wouldn't want to lose the BTAA, but I think, if I talk to a lot of sports fans, they're intrigued by the situation. And of course, there are going to be a lot of people who just, have the pack mentality in the SEC and be like, yeah, bring it. Ohio State's going to lose 3 games a year going against this schedule. I don't typically agree with those statements, but it's certainly, I certainly think a team coming into that situation is going to be in any sort of advantage when all these other teams have had years and years and years to scout each other and play each other, if not yearly, every couple of years, and then in comes Ohio State, the new kid on the block. I don't think I could see Notre Dame in the Big Ten since they're already affiliated with the ACC. Exactly, Dalton. And as I said earlier, too, it's a situation of where Notre Dame really can't go anywhere other than the ACC through the mid-2030s, barring some sort of major legal relief. And again, there are people far smarter than me in terms of figuring some of those things out. We've seen teams leave conferences, get reduced buyouts, things that, there's a lot of things in play, but Notre Dame doesn't want to give up its deal. Notre Dame's got the best of both worlds. Sure, under the 12-team expansion proposal, Notre Dame, without being in a conference, without conference affiliation, can't have a top 4 seed. They can't do it. It's impossible. But Notre Dame's inclusion, not playing a conference schedule, is kind of a coup. Notre Dame getting 100% of its TV share on NBC is a coup. So, Dr. Jack Swarbrick there doesn't have to really give up much. So unless we get to a point of where the powers that be in college football say you have to be in a conference to advance, there's no reason for Notre Dame to go anywhere. There really isn't. And, I know it's funny the amount of Ohio State people that I know that Notre Dame is number 2 on their list of schools that they don't like. And, I've heard a litany of reasons of why. And, that's everybody's thing. Oh, they're arrogant, blah, 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 blah. Why should they get this? Geographical proximity. Oh, I went to school with a kid who went to Notre Dame. He was a real turd. I just hate him because of that. Whatever, what have you. I get it. But, I don't see Notre Dame moving. I don't see a situation where Notre Dame moves until it has to. Maybe adding UCF and South Florida. Again, who are we trying to help here? And again, I understand we're having this on a Big Ten level discussion. We're not having this on an Ohio State level, because Ohio State doesn't need help down there. It doesn't, period. Other schools do, so there is something there. But, South Florida is, I think both of them are kind of commuter schools. I just don't think that either of them are going to fit the profile that the Big Ten brass thinks that it needs to bring in terms of what admission is going to be for joining the Big Ten. And, UCF certainly has had its run of success. They have their national championship and everything else. And South Florida, you certainly bring Tampa into the equation and whatnot. There's some improvement there, but is there $70 million worth of improvement for each of them? $140 million combined. Is that worth getting Minnesota, maybe that under-recruited 3-star out of Apopka, getting that under-recruited 3-star out of Lehigh Acres? I don't know. I don't think it is. I don't know. But again, we don't know. I mean, there were only there are 3 slam dunks out there, and 2 of them are going to the SEC, and 1 of them isn't going anywhere right now, and that's Texas, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame. If we're taking at face value that teams and conferences that are established and going well right now, that those teams aren't going to move. There's not anything else out there. Kansas is not a slam dunk. Iowa State is not a slam dunk. UCF is not a slam dunk. South Florida is not a slam dunk, but there are few of them. I mean, if Ohio State suddenly put out we're listening type of memo, Ohio State would be a slam dunk for other conferences. But again, I don't know. You don't see a situation to where you have a lot of portability. I mean, that's why we all love realignment expansion rumors so much, because it happens so infrequently. So it's kind of a special occasion. It's kind of, I mean, I really enjoy going on and reading as many rumors as I can and rolling my eyes at 90% of them, but still listening to them, still processing them. This will work because of this. This one won't work because of this. I have fun with all of that. So I don't know. Before I move on to a next topic, I'm gonna open it up to y'all. I'm gonna kind of reset as we're about 45 minutes into the show. You're watching BIA Live. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. Be sure to like the channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Give me that thumbs up. Let me know you're enjoying this. Ask me your questions before we move on. I think I'm probably going to have to table the Big Ten Media Days talk a little bit until the end of the week. I'm going to do a second show this week. I'm going to see if I can get Griffin on with me and we can talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Olympics here on the back end, but I'm giving you guys a chance to get your questions in. We've had 10 to 15 of you on the line concurrently. I know that this is going to be a show that's going to be consumed more in terms of rebroadcast because I didn't promote this one well. We're going to get better about that, I promise. Yak off with a question. I can't remember a more significant off-season topic than this. It feels like NIL started about 5 years ago. NIL's been going on for a long time. I mean, since, the Ed O'Bannon situation with the video game and everything else, we've been talking about NIL and what's going to happen there and so on and so forth. And then NIL, we're building up. Boom, COVID. And we kind of lost track of NIL for, a year plus, and now it's here. But because there's not any federal law, there's not any NC2A wide mandate or anything like that, we're kind of dealing case by case, and it's not like you're going to go out and see a lot of these situations. And I want to bring up something funny from social, and that's the Luke Whippler situation in terms of sweatshirts. Luke Whippler, a lot of guys are going out and kind of have their own shops in terms of whether or not it's clothing that they've designed logos for, whatnot. And I'm not going to call the guy out because I know him, and honestly I think he's a good guy in terms of talking to him. He being a Michigan guy, I think there are going to be a lot of people here that would probably want to fight him in the parking lot, but I've had the opportunity to talk to him. Good guy to me, but it is what it is. But James Yoder comes out and says, I can understand, wanting to go out and get stuff from, maybe the top guys, but I'm not going to buy a $50 sweatshirt from Luke Whippler. Well, that didn't take long because Luke Whippler now has he has a sweatshirt with the tweet printed on it. It's already sold at the time that we went live on the show, 80, 90 of them. I mean, so everybody's like, oh, $50 times that. No, he's not going to get to keep all of that. I mean, there's material costs, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just a situation of where he'll get a taste of it. But still, it just goes to show that we're not necessarily going to be seeing a lot of guys doing NIL deals with Honda or, Coca-Cola or General Mills or whatever. A lot of these deals are going to be small deals. Hey, I've got these cool sweatshirts. You should buy it. Hey, I'm doing this stuff with this supplement company. You should check this out. Hey, I'm going to be at, the Marion Mall doing a signing over at, at I don't know. I lived in Marion briefly, and last time I was up the mall, there was nothing open there, so I couldn't think of anything. But I'm doing a signing at a bookstore, at a Barnes and Noble. Come out and in support or whatever. It's going to be a lot of nickel dimers, and that doesn't mean we got Bryce Young at Alabama, who's going to be making allegedly close to $1 million here as this thing starts. All right, and for every Bryce Young, you're going to have 1,000 guys who might make a couple $100 or whatever. I mean, so kind of is, and I want to jump in Yakov with a clarification. He means pushing it off the front pages, and I think that absolutely this Texas OU thing has grabbed the attention of everybody out there. This is immediate. This is wow. This is the news. We understand expansion. We understand realignment. Do we understand NIL? Do we really understand it? Could you sit there and stand in front of a lecture and really give the finer points of what NIL is, what the differences are from state to state? Who has it, who doesn't, what that means? I can't. I've written very few NIL stories because I don't feel comfortable enough about the subject matter to say that I know all the fine details of it. I don't. But I don't think a lot of us do. I know a couple of sports attorneys who certainly do a lot of podcasts and things about it, and it's all well and good, and that's more of their arena, and hats off to them for being able to do that. But that's not necessarily where my expertise is. My expertise is elsewhere. Talk to my wife. It's making a mess and drinking bourbon. Oh boy. Buddy of mine speaking of having friends from the South, a buddy of mine from the SEC. When Ohio State applies to be considered for entry in the SEC, which Big Ten school are they bringing with them? Well, if we're going to sit there and answer this question face value straight up, you probably have to bring Michigan with you. And people are going to be like, what have they done? They won half a national championship since like the 40s. But it's still that big name splash. That's who you would have to bring with you. I think that there are probably a lot of people in the SEC who would not be aligned with some of the, with where Dr. Schlissel is there in terms of, if you believe that he truly was not in favor of playing a season last year or whatnot. A lot of stuff going on there, but that would, it certainly wouldn't be Ohio State and Rutgers, Ohio State and Michigan State, Ohio State and Illinois. You'd have to bring one of these top programs with you. Somebody could say, what about Penn State? I think if you ever saw any defections from the Big Ten, I think you'd see Penn State try to go to the ACC. There are a lot of fans there that hate the Big Ten, and would try to go to the ACC. But yeah, Mike, thanks. We'll see on that one. I'm not convinced that we're going to see Ohio State bolt for greener pastures per se. You don't want Harbaugh. Well, there are a lot of people in Ann Arbor that don't want Harbaugh either, to be honest. So go back to the BuckeyeGrove video channel and check out the video that I posted of some answers from Jim Harbaugh from Big Ten Media Days. He's a trip. He's a trip. So I think we'll just, as I said, we'll table the Big Ten Media Days talk for later in the week, but let's kind of get to the Olympics and something I want to talk about, and that's the Simone Biles situation with gymnastics. And all right, Yakov jumped in with something else. Let me jump in with Yakov first, and then we'll talk about Simone. I'm concerned MAC-type teams will have less opportunities playing super conference teams. I agree, and that's where this division is going to happen. When I've said for years and years and years, you're going to have a top 48 teams. You're going to have a top 32 teams split off. You're going to see FBS split down the middle, and you're going to have you're going to have these top teams go and set their own rules and set their own standards and whatnot. And you're going to have everybody else who cannot afford that price of admission remain in FBS or whatever the rebrand of FBS might be. And that is going to be problematic for your Sunbelt MAC type of teams, that Mountain West teams that probably are not going to be able to get there. But with that being said, can Vanderbilt get there? Can certain teams in the Big Ten get there? Do they want to get there? do they want to get there? Do they want to spend that type of money on athletics? Are they getting that kind of stroke? But the ultimate losers in these situations, and I don't mean it as losers as in, oh, you're a loser. I mean it as you're just losing out, are going to be the non-rev sports. Because while these buy games for 2.2 million, 2.5 million certainly make the football budget, it also goes in to pay for these non-revenue sports. And we saw during COVID, we saw some non-revenue sports fall by the wayside at a lot of universities. I think you could see even more of that, and that ultimately hurts, these student athletes. And just because you don't care as much about watching women's track or men's pistol or whatever, I mean, it still provides a lot of opportunity out there, and I think that would be a very disappointing outcome, side effect, whatever, if we do have that kind of split and we do have a situation to where you have 60, 70 teams who, sure, they can go on and they can get into their own scheduling alliance, but if you have a team that couldn't necessarily afford to move the needle to get into the big boy league, are they going to cut you a $2.2 million check for coming in for a bye game? The answer is going to be no. You're going to have to just a lot of home and homes, and you're going to have to really hope that you get it at the gate in terms of attendance and everything else, because there's just not going to be that type of money. Or maybe you have a situation where, as part of the charter of this new situation, that there's some money earmarked that gets kicked down. I don't know. That feels awful salary cap-ish to me, and I hate the salary cap for a lot of reasons. But with that being said, I also hate the idea of lack of access for these athletes to be able, and especially in these non-revenue sports, to be able to go out and compete. Um, I was not a collegiate athlete by any stretch. My glory days went through high school, and I use the term glory days loosely. But I think that athletics is just so important for the development of anybody. I just have a major issue with that. But let me wrap up here in the last couple minutes with Simone Biles, who withdrew from the Olympics this morning. I'm sorry, I should have said spoiler alert. My bad. I should have jumped in and been like, hey, if you haven't watched, or you're not paying attention to social, she's withdrawn. It's more of a mental thing than it is a physical thing. At first, the thought was that maybe she injured herself. That poor girl is carrying the weight of an entire nation on her back. And obviously, the Olympic team did not. Hey, Cheryl, I see your point. I'll jump on it here in a second. She didn't get off to the start that she wanted, but I don't think that the American Olympic experience has been great to begin with. I won't get into what happened in the team competition or whatever, because now as I think about it, there are probably people who haven't seen it are going to wait to watch it in prime time. But it's not been a great performance. But we saw Naomi Osaka on the tennis side of things. She withdrew because of the media obligations and everything else. And as a media member, I had mixed feelings about that, because part of those big purses are uh, you know access to the media, being able to promote the event and whatnot. But we are getting to the point where I think we need to really look at the mental health, the mental stability of everybody as they're competing on these stages. But I don't know if it's even necessarily a situation of just, your tip top athletes who are competing either at Wimbledon or in Tokyo in the Olympics or whatever. I've seen such a, we still have not been able to destigmatize mental health. And we still see a situation, especially with males, whether they be athletes or not athletes, that they have, that by talking about mental issues that you're dealing with, whether or not it's just a matter of being blue and melancholy, or there's something bigger there, that talking about it is a matter of weakness, and that it just makes you less of a man, and that it's just horrible. I'm somebody who deals with a lot of those issues. I get melancholy, I get blue, and I think that it's important, if you have somebody that that's going through those issues, that you're there to talk to them. No judgment zone. Be there for them. Let them know that you're there to listen to some of the things that they're going through, because certainly not everybody's carrying the Olympic hopes of the women's gymnastics team on their back, but the problems that somebody may be dealing with are very real. They're very real to them, and it's important to be there for them, to give them that support, because losing one person to mental illness is one too many, and we're losing too many out there. So I'll get off my soapbox there. Just how important it is. Be there, be a good friend. If you know somebody's going through that, there are resources out there if you're going through it. Be sure to be out there to talk about these things. Don't let these things eat you away. But again, we're here at about the hour mark, but I want to get to these last couple of comments. The Olympics are going on right now. Yeah, they are. They are. They absolutely are. So they're on NBC and the NBC family of channels, and I've watched more than I thought I would. And that's not, stick to sports. I'm not getting into any of the politics of it because it has nothing to do with it. I just, it didn't happen in 2020 like it was supposed to. Moves to 2021. There are no fans there. It's kind of a vacuum in the way it's set up. I mean, there's a 12, 13, 14 hour time difference. I mean, things are going on while most people are asleep. They're being, the results are getting out. I mean, that's what happens when you have a world showcase. Somebody's going to be on the wrong end of the clock, and the 4 time zones of the Americas, or more than that when you put Hawaii in there. The time zones of the Americas are getting the brunt of that because of where it is, but it kind of is what it is. Cheryl, I'm going to hit your answers in reverse order. Whoops, I got the wrong one there. It's a medical field for over 25 years. Mental health is real, and don't be ashamed to reach out. Absolutely. I agree 1,000%, Cheryl. It's, it's a big deal. It really is. You don't know how many people it touches. But let's get into your others. I don't see the Buckeyes going to the ACC. Stay put in the Big Ten and see. Not to go on another downhill riff on this, but I want to definitely answer Cheryl's point here before we call it a show. Yeah, I don't see a situation where Ohio State would join the ACC. I mean, stranger things have happened, but do you like the direction of the Big Ten right now? Is that what you like? Were you encouraged with some of the things that you heard coming from the commissioner's office at Big Ten Media Days? Do you think that the right, that Ohio State's interests are being served well with where it's at right now? And that's a question that I put to each and every one of you. I mean, I've got my opinions. I don't think that moving is necessarily the right decision, but I certainly do have some questions and concerns about where the conference may be headed in terms of how some things are being decided or whatnot. And until things dramatically changes, there's nothing there that's going to keep Ohio State from winning football games and doing this and doing that. I get it, but I'm just not convinced at this point that the Big Ten has a manual to win in terms of conference versus conference. And I sometimes think that the Big Ten has a view of the prize at the end of the rainbow is different than what the SEC says or what the SEC believes. The SEC obviously has a closet full of crystal footballs and those golden leg lamps that signify the CFP champion, whereas the Big Ten, certainly is competitive, but I think the Big Ten, I don't know if their focus is in the right place as a whole. And I don't know what it's going to take to convince me otherwise. And does that mean that bringing other teams in is going to sit there and change that? Or are you just going to have other teams under the same cocoon of whatever? And I'm not convinced of that. Ben jumping in. I was looking forward to watching Olympics last year when we didn't have sports. Just can't get into it right now. The swimming, I enjoyed watching the swimming. It was a great race. And what was it? The women's 400 freestyle with Katie Ledecky coming in second to the Australian. Katie Ledecky puts up whatever, like the 4th fastest time of the year. The Australian puts up the 2nd fastest time. It was a very interesting race. I just happened to be somewhere where it was on. I didn't think about turning it on. I haven't really watched any of the gymnastics. I probably will watch track and field. I do enjoy a lot of it. I was out to dinner last night, and the women's triathlon was on. That's such a long event, and they do their best to cut it down, but yeah, hard to follow there. Cheryl doesn't believe that Kevin Warren is the leader. Warren is the leader the Big Ten needs at this point. And then Yakov, the Big Ten probably needs to sit down with the Fox execs and tell them which schools will increase the TV contract. As a former Fox employee, I can tell you there are plenty of smart people that work at Fox. Maybe a couple that aren't great at their jobs, but I don't know if they're still there anymore. And that's my own personal opinion. But yeah, I think it's going to be a situation of where TV is going to have to be heavily involved in this. It has to be. It has to be. And, I just think there needs to be somebody that's there that says, you have to add teams for the right reasons. Adding Maryland, adding Rutgers didn't work in terms of athletics, but I don't think anybody expected something to be immediate. I mean, okay, women's basketball. I mean, Maryland does a pretty good job at women's basketball. Rutgers played better in football last year. I think that they have some moments. Steve Peichel seems to be a good guy in terms of where they are in terms of men's basketball, but the Big Ten can't put itself in a situation where it takes teams that are already kind of sub 500 in athletics, or ones that are just 1 or 2 years above 500, believing that that's going to stick. Because I think by the time the thing is that you could be a team that's going 8-4, 9-3 every year against lesser competition. Throw them in the Big Ten. Are you still going 8-4, 9-3? I get it if you believe that UCF could go in and win, beat 60% of the Big Ten year in and year out. Doing that week in and week out, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to pick on certain schools in the AAC right now, but you're not playing Cincinnati every week in the AAC. You're just not. So what happens if you sit there and you get a 3-game run of where you play at Wisconsin, home against Penn State, and at Ohio State? You're probably going 0-3, honestly. If you're coming in and you're not built as a Big Ten team and you do it differently. How many times have we seen a coach come in with this, I've got an idea of how we're going to make this work, Rich Rodriguez, how we're going to make this work, Scott Frost, and it hasn't worked. So I don't know. And that's not to sit there and say that SC or UCLA are going to come in and win 8 games. No, they're probably not. I mean, not at first. But I think it would help schools like that certainly to be able to say, okay, we're going to be in a conference that people are actually going to watch outside of a 6-state area. We're in a conference that seems to have a plan, and that's nothing against the new Pac-12 commissioner. That just has to deal with Larry Scott's tenure was not a success by any stretch of the imagination there. So I don't know. But we're about an hour 7 in. And again, I just wanted to get in, talk a little bit about Ohio State's position on all of this expansion talk, the Big Ten's expansion talk, where all of that is. We didn't get to talking about Big Ten Media Days. That'll be there. I'm going to link up with Griffin Strom. We'll do another show later this week. I promise to promote that one better. Talk a little bit about the Olympics. Again, remember, if you're struggling or dealing with mental issues right now, mental health issues, there are resources out there. Please do not remain silent. You do not have to go through this alone. Please reach out. People are out there. People are there to help you. People love you. Don't allow this to get to you. Don't feel like you have to shoulder the weight of the world alone. It's difficult enough to get through things day to day. It's only worse to have to get through it with that type of stress on your shoulders. So until then, I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I want to thank you for watching the show, and we will talk to you again here